Well, welcome everyone to the participants who have joined us for tonight's webinar and the viewers who are watching the recording. Before I get started, MHPN would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, seas and waterways across Australia upon which our webinar presenters and participants are located. We wish to pay our respect to the elders past and present and future for the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia. Hi, my name is Dana Shen. I'll be facilitating tonight's session. I am a Ngarrindjeri Chinese woman, cultural consultant with Emerging Minds. There's a few things that I'd like to mention before we get started. Emerging Minds will start a series in August, and the first webinar will be assessment strategies to nurture responsive parenting and support infant and toddler mental health on the 15th of August. A few technical things just to help you along the way in listening tonight. New webinar play instructions. To interact with the webinar platform and to access resources, select the following options. Click three dots lower right corner of your screen to access information. Under the information tab, you will find links to slides, resources, survey, and the technical support. You can access the chat top right. To ask a question, click the speech bubble icon lower right of your screen and submit a question. I'll be monitoring this throughout the webinars. And of course, one of the things I think is really important is your self-care. Take care of yourself in this. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about are hard. As we talk about the experience of First Nations peoples, you do what you need to take care of yourself. Whilst I won't be going through all of the learning outcomes, what I did want to highlight was the aim for tonight. We are going to be thinking about decolonising mental health when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families, and how this can improve their social and emotional wellbeing. I'd like to now introduce very briefly the panel. You already have the bio, so to give us maximum time to be with you tonight and for all of us to be talking together, just very briefly, we have Professor Pat Dudgeon, we have Shirley Young and Tileah Drahm-Butler. I'd like to welcome all of them tonight. They're wonderful panellists and you're going to be fascinated by the things that they speak about tonight. So the format that we've got tonight is, first of all, that Auntie Pat will be giving a short presentation, and then we'll start to go through a series of questions and answers across the whole panel. So on that, I'd first of all like to hand over to Auntie Pat Dudgeon. Please, Aunt, if you could start first.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dana. I beg your pardon. I'd like to acknowledge and your welcome or acknowledgement of country. I'm actually phoning in from Perth in Western Australia, from beautiful Noongar. My background is that I'm from the Bardi people of the Kimberley, so that's a little bit about me. I've been around for many years working in the area, particularly I am a psychologist, and I think one of the big challenges for me was that when I graduated and looked at what mental health had to offer people, it was very limited. So for me, it's been a bit of a journey, and I think one of the things that I find exciting is that we've started to challenge, those old knowledge systems and to look for paradigms and models that suit our realities and are useful to us. Before we were not in the conversation at all. Now we are, and I'm particularly proud of some of our developments with the social emotional wellbeing diagram and paradigm. Now, this came from a history. It didn't come out of nowhere or our brilliant intellects. It actually came from a long line of Indigenous health leaders who talked about, the notion of holistic health and what was important to our people and what reflected the values and the realities of our people. So it was the Indigenous Psych Association that took the Ways Forward report, also the the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people's mental health and social and emotional wellbeing framework, and pull that together into a diagram that's easy to understand and read. So this has been a very, very important development and has been very much embraced by our communities. And it is, if we think of the notion of self and the interventions that need to happen, if we do use this model, that the self isn't just about your mind and your body. We do depart from a westernised, notion of self, where they focus on mind and body. But to us, it's important. Our connection to our family and kinship makes us the people we are. It's our connection to our family, and usually that's through kinship. It's our connection to our culture, our connection to our country, very important, our country and land, and our connection to our spirit, our spirituality, and our ancestors. So these are all domains that make up social emotional wellbeing, but it's not in a vacuum. It actually, there's a history behind it, because behind us is a history of colonisation. And we do take an anti-colonial standpoint where we have to, recognise that impact of a colonial legacy upon us, and, the genocides, the takeover of lands, the removal into reserves and missions, and later on the policies that were not good for us, and still ongoing racism and disadvantage. So that is around our notion of a self. And so these are the historical determinants, political determinants, cultural determinants, which we strive towards, and social determinants. So we have to recognise that we are a marginalised people in a mainstream society, and there has been a history of oppression. So for us, the way forward is that we need an opportunity to recover and to heal and to build up our own Indigenous knowledge systems. That's our way forward. And I was speaking to someone earlier today, and this SEWB isn't only for Aboriginal people, although that is our first focus. It's for all people. We all, who we are in our histories, our families, communities, our different cultures, our connections to country, whether it's, for us, it's a more intimate and immediate connection, but we are people of the earth, and that's important to remember too. So I know this model has been used to work with non-Indigenous clients as well, but it's a big a paradigm shift that's coming in. It is holistic, it's in all these domains. They look like very neat slices of a pie or pizza, but actually they all overlap, and often you'll have, a number of different domains, in action in a given situation. And through your life course as a person, different domains may have more significance or importance. So I'm really proud of this model. We're working with lots of different groups, particularly Aboriginal medical services, to look at their social emotional wellbeing services. And as I said, we've presented, when we first developed the diagram, we went out and presented it to big conferences with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health workers, and it was very welcome. So everyone supported it, because until then I think they only saw very Western models of explaining who we were, who our values and aspirations were. So this is fundamental, and we've used it in suicide prevention, that if we can get, obviously we don't throw away clinical elements, but there's a broader consideration that we need to have with our mental health and wellbeing. But I'll stop then, because I tend to rabbit on too much. So I'll stop and I'll hand it back to Dana.
Thank you so much, Art, and it's wonderful to have you lay that foundation for us. Everyone, we're about to go to a Q&A with all of the panel members. So if it helps, you can click on the video of us to expand our images, and that means you can get to see us all as we're talking. Before I move on to the first question, I just wanted to just make sure that I clarify something. When you're speaking about the social and emotional wellbeing wheel, I mean, this really lays the foundation for all the work that we do in terms of colonisation, decolonising the work. So I just wanted to clarify it's the foundation, isn't it? It's really the key. It's a starting point that we can do all our work on.
Absolutely, and it's something that validates our knowledges, our Indigenous knowledges, and our values. When I studied psychology, I really could not see where we fit in there. I think we got a mention in, abnormal psychology or something like that. It was no minority groups were considered. This is going back in the day. I mean, there's been giant steps forward, but the yardstick that we've always been measured against is not one that considers our realities and our values. And even for mainstream people, I think that it's been remiss. But it is the foundation. So I hope that, I was talking to someone earlier today and I said, this model, I hope, will be superseded in time to come, because I think other Indigenous knowledge systems and models will start to emerge, particularly from local groups. And hopefully in the future there won't be a need for this. But it does lay the foundations.
Great. Thank you so much, Aunt. And one thing I just wanted to say too is that registrants did put forward a range of questions. We're doing our very best to answer these in the conversation that we've had. Thank you so much for those. And of course, you can ask other questions as well. So the first question that I really want to ask everybody is, what does decolonisation mean to you? So I wondered if I could start with Tileah first. What does decolonisation mean to you?
Thanks, Dana. And thanks, Auntie Pat, for your description of the social emotional wellbeing paradigm. I guess in my work, I see the effects of colonialism and how it plays out in people's lives. And I'm talking about my work in the emergency department, where I guess, I see the ways that the social determinants of health is what presents through the door, and also how colonialism pollutes practice and it pollutes the care that, services provide. As Patrick Wolfe notably states, colonialism is a structure and not an event. And this structure is based on white supremacy, on male supremacy and human supremacy. And, this structure has embedded in it a notion of a way of being that divides people and, pushes people outside of the dominant discourse. In fact, you talked about, having abnormal psychology. And I agree, we've taken a lot of steps, but, it's still not hard to get into the abnormal category, unfortunately, where so many people are pushed to the periphery of society. This colonial project, it relies on these systems of supremacy to continue to rape the land, to oppress the peoples of this land, and all for the purpose of profit. So, what's this got to do with the systems that we work in? I think that for many of us, we work in a field that is, certainly in and around these systems of oppression. And many people say that, some of these systems cannot be decolonised, that they need to be abolished and started anew. And I think that this is a really important critique, especially when we're thinking about systems such as child removal systems, the injustice system. There's a danger that in regards to some of these kind of areas of injustice that our mob are dealing with, that if we're using the language of decolonising, that yes, we're acknowledging that the colonial project is violent to us all, but it might steer us away from important conversations around racism and race and how this gets in the way of people listening, how racism really gets in the way of our steps and continued efforts towards decolonisation. So I think that this is a really important critique to hold on to. And, you know, as E. Tuck names, decolonisation is not a metaphor. So to think about, you know, when we are thinking about decolonising, we need to be able to push aside the racism, to listen to it. But also we're thinking about this and really narrowing down in our own practice. And, you know, this is about attending to the ways that power operates through our own work, through the services that we work for. And, you know, your description of the social emotional wellbeing paradigm, Auntie Pat, you know, like you said, this is a profound invitation towards best practice. And it's the paradigm shift that, you know, not just our mob need, but the planet is needing a paradigm shift. And, you know, our Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing offer this way out from the effects of colonialism. And I was just thinking as you were talking that, you know, lots of people kind of reference and draw point to Professor Michael Marmot's social determinants of health. But I think that unless you're taking this holistic view of self and of health and the health of the community, the health of the planet, that actually you can't understand the social determinants of health as anything other than just categories and kind of separated descriptions of the parts of us. But it's, as you say, it's all interacting all at once. So I guess just to finish that response, Dana, you know, I think that decolonisation is not new and that it's happening. It's always been happening. It's happened, you know, on many levels, systemic levels. There's a lot of work, you know, with the Voice to Parliament. This is a step towards decolonisation. But, you know, when we're thinking tonight, this conversation is about our practice and the services that we work for. And, you know, we can't let it be a metaphor and doing things like putting art on the walls without doing the labour of responding to structural racism in services. You know, so I think that, yeah, this is a great start and an important conversation to have.
Thank you so much, Tileah. And one of the things that I found so important about what you said is the interconnectedness of things that builds on the social and emotional wellbeing model, but also talks about the interconnectedness with the earth, is what you also spoke about, and how important it is to actually know that for us to actually decolonise. So I just wanted to emphasise that message that you gave. Shirley, I'd like to hand over to you now. What does decolonisation mean to you?
Thanks so much, Dana. Auntie Pat, I just want to thank you that your colleagues and yourself actually took that step of creating a different framework. I know that it takes braveness to do something different and to say, hang on a minute, this structure doesn't suit us, so thank you. And Tileah, thank you so much for introducing colonisation in that way, because it does sit in power structures, doesn't it? I guess for me, I work across the state of South Australia, working with staff a lot, and what I find to be one of the greatest issues is that there is this great big elephant in the room, and it's usually in relation to practice, and it's about culture versus clinical work. And so for me, this is one of those power structures that occurs when we're talking about colonisation and what we see as important. So often I see practitioners talking about the fact that there is you know, difference between the importance of culture and clinical work. And I often find that practitioners will often say that the clinical aspects of things are way more important than culture. And what usually happens is we have practitioners doing assessments that include primarily clinical aspects, and often the cultural part of things is not present. You don't see it in the conversations that you're having, and you certainly don't see it in the case notes and I guess the formulations that people are actually making when they're working with people. So often what we find is that Aboriginal staff are left out of discussions, they're left out of decision-making processes, and we see assessments that are really based on, assessment of risk and harm and worries about families. And what it fails to consider is the strengths and the protective factors in culture that actually allay some of the worries that we actually see when you only look at risk. So really, what ends up happening is we often see very deficit models being delivered to our families. And the problem with that is that Aboriginal families have huge amounts of strengths that exist in culture. And if we're only looking for the risks all the time and we're not sort of weighing it up, protective nature of culture, then unfortunately we will always see families having problems. That the family are the problem, and often we don't look at the fact that actually the problem is the problem. That we're sitting in a society that is very dominant. The dominant culture shows through, and the Aboriginal family will often be written about that in that way. So for me, one of the biggest issues with colonisation is that our families are actually viewed in ways where they're a problem, basically. So there are a bunch of things that I would like to see happen around that. I'd like to see the use of the social emotional wellbeing model used. I'd like to see clinicians and Aboriginal staff working together to actually look at how they can actually utilise the social emotional wellbeing model, which is a model that Aboriginal people connect to, and actually writing their assessments together so that it actually shows the clinical side of things that are happening, but also the cultural side of things that are happening, and actually weighed up between the two, as opposed to having this splitting thing that goes on between staff. So for me, when I think about colonisation, Dana, that's actually one of the greatest issues that I see in practice on the ground. And I'd really love to see us actually find ways where we can work together and actually have culture represented in an appropriate way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Shirley. The question I'm about to move to next, Auntie Pat, I'll be coming to you. It'd be good to sort of hear a little bit more about your view of decolonisation first, but also really why is this so important to the social and emotional and mental health and wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and children? So Shirley's already started to touch on that, but it'd be great to hear your perspective on that, Auntie Pat.
Look, there's a lot of, that's a big question, but I'm going to try and answer it. There's a big history, when you think that, and our issues, we know that we've got really good reports about our state of well-being or not well-being. We've got the overcoming disadvantage, Indigenous disadvantage reports, with ABS produces reports all the time. We've got the Close the Gap strategy, which is about closing that health gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. So we do pretty badly across all the social indicators that they can measure. And we come from a history where, even bringing them home, the bringing them home movement that started up, which is about the stolen generations, where children were taken off their families and put into missions and reserves. And that's led, we know that stolen generation people have more well-being challenges. So for Aboriginal people, any human being, they need to be kept with their family. And I think that how we perceive families or what we value, that needs to be taken, cultural differences need to be taken into consideration and appreciated. I think for any profession, whether it's, medicine, psychology, social work, or whatever, we need to ensure that our disciplines are culturally responsive. So we know that there's a lot of unconscious bias in when police make judgments and so on, when they make judgments about the health of our people. And there's been a lot of unnecessary deaths because of that. racism is still a big issue, and it's not just the blatant racism, it's that subtle unconscious racism, and it's also institutionalised racism, where, you know, we look at the institutions of our society and, you know, we do not as well in education. We're in the lockups and prisons at a higher number. So I think that holistic approach, and also taking a critical viewpoint of what's happening in our society, is absolutely essential, and going right back now to planetary health. And we know that it's about self-determination and respect and cultural solutions. We know that during COVID-19, NACCHO, which is our national Aboriginal community controlled organisation, they moved quickly and they started getting communities ready. They knew that an epidemic was coming. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine who worked in one of the Aboriginal medical services, and he was telling me how they were getting ready for, you know, they think a big thing was coming, and we didn't know at the time, but they got ready and they were and I thought, wow, you guys are amazing. Is that happening across the country? And he said, yes, you know, NACCHO's coordinating it all. And we know that during COVID-19, very few, I think there was one initially in the first couple of years, death. There was only one or a handful of deaths from COVID-19. I won't just say one, there could have been more. But not like it used to be in the old days when we had like other epidemics that came. We would do very badly. We had very high death rates because of a whole range of factors, you know, that people didn't care about us, and or we weren't given, you know, access to hospitalisation and whatnot. But the point of what happened during COVID-19 is that if you enable self-determination, Aboriginal groups to make their own decisions about what needs to happen for their people, it ends up being very successful. So I'm sure there's going to be challenges along the way, but our people are they know the solutions. We need to empower them to take charge of their lives, their family lives and their communities. So for us, when we do any research, it's always participatory action research. I could not do a piece of research without, you know, talking to Aboriginal people who are, you know, who that research is about. They have to be part of it. They're co-researchers. So the big issue for me, and I don't know if I've gone off track here, Dana, is it's about the social determinants. It's about, you know, re-empowering people. You know, we've had the stuffing knocked out of us with the processes of colonisation that happen, and because we talk about it, people don't take it as serious. Like Stan Grant, when he came out and talked about the racism that he had suffered, that resonated with all of us. We've all experienced, you know, not as probably so intense as he has, because, you know, he's so in the public eye, but we've all had those, you know, experiences of racism. But people think, oh, you know, just get over it. And I don't know if, I think that it wounds you all the time. And so I'll just end on that note. I'm sort of free associating. Thank you, guys.
Beautiful, Pat, Auntie Pat, and I just wanted to sort of say, just sort of summarise some of the key things for people that you said. I mean, I think the first thing is that obviously it's not always direct racism. You mentioned the nuanced racism as well as institutional that can play a profound role, but also the importance of how do we give power to families and community around challenging these things. Yes. But also the importance of how the nature of what we're experiencing is an ongoing and living experience, and that includes things like racism that's ongoing and continuous. So I think you touched on a lot of things there, but I think those ones really say, why is it important for, you know, families and children to be supported in this way around decolonisation? It's because of the things that you've spoken about and those key areas that you spoke about. So we've got questions that are starting to come through, and one of them is talking a lot about the practical side of things. What can they do to support families? I just wanted to let listeners know that we'll be getting to that, but I'll just continue on with Tileah and Shirley first to talk a little bit more about why it's important for Aboriginal families and children's mental health and social and emotional wellbeing, why decolonisation is important. Tileah, I just wanted to ask that question of you briefly first, and then I'll go to Shirley.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. And not to sort of repeat anything that you're saying, Auntie Pat, but you're exactly right. The story, there's one story that gets told about Aboriginal people, and I see in my community, I think that the kids are actually suffering the brunt of that. There is a story that is told about Indigenous kids, and it's having a really devastating effect. The story that's been made most available is of us as criminalised, poor, sick. There's a lot written about us being on the brink of extinction and the ways that this narrative, benefits the colonial project. Having this as the story that gets told makes it possible to continue to imprison us at increasing numbers. Aboriginal women are the highest growing rate of imprisoned people in the world. It's this colonial project that is continuing this. And certainly, it's this story that has our children being taken away from their families, from their culture and kin at increasing in record numbers. And I think for us to really kind of point at that, the colonial project is benefiting from this. And, for many of us, we work in like a suffering industry, that there's an industry built on locating problems within our identities. And you touched on that before, Shirley, that, Aboriginal people are seen as the problem. And, there's an industry that's built on this. And I think, because this is the story that just gets told over and over, that it's continuing to pollute new graduates and systems, and it's embedded, it's kind of that unconscious bias, although sometimes I kind of question, if they're awake, is it really that unconscious? But, what this system does as well is pushes our Indigenous theories, as kind of an add-on. And there's no better example than the social and emotional wellbeing framework. But, it's kind of seen as a way of measuring our disadvantage instead of, as we talked about, honouring the way that health can be understood. Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing, are inclusive and welcoming, and practices of hospitality are embedded into culture. And, recently I was in a conversation, and Aranda man Tyson Carmody really brought it home that, this notion of you can't be what you can't see. And so for First Nations kids who are only seeing this story told about us, going into services where they're not seeing themselves, reflected in that, it's having a huge impact on how people can access health and think about health. And, it's, I think that, it's not kind of left of centre to be talking about the health of the planet in this, because it's directly related. And, how we treat First Nations people reflects how we're treating the planet, and vice versa. So I think that, our kids are responding quite appropriately to this really sick system. And young people across the board, mental health, is in a crisis state. And I think that, it's really important that we all take a look at the reasons behind this, and to, hopefully the message tonight is look for a different way of doing it. And, the paradigm shift that I guess we talked about in university when, they talk about wanting to go out and change the world. Well, absolutely. And it's written, it's documented, it's in a very easy to understand diagram. And I think, time's running out, actually. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Tileah. I think touching base on the broader issues that are facing our race as a human race, of what we're going through too, and what we can learn from First Nations peoples in general about this. Shirley, I know that you do so much work with families and children. That's actually one of your biggest roles. And so I wondered, why is this so important? Why is decolonisation so important to the wellbeing, the mental health, the social and emotional wellbeing of our children and families?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Well, I guess for starters, mental health is not really a term that Aboriginal people can really relate to start with. It's a medical model. It's a model that has categorised us in the past. It's a model that hasn't looked at us in a whole. It has problematized us. It's really not a model that we actually refer to. It's basically a model that has provided us with often negative experiences. And even children know when they actually go to access mental health services. I had one young fella come into an organisation that I work for, and he said to me, "What's that sign say, Mum? That says mental health." And he didn't want to come in because he realised he wasn't mental. And so for a young person to actually notice that, I think we actually need to think about the narratives that we're using for this work. So social emotional well-being models obviously mean that we look at the whole person and we look at the child in the context of their family and their community as well. And I think that's really important. In these services, we need to allow time to actually connect with our children and our families. We need to allow people the opportunity to talk about what is actually happening for them. We need them to be able to create connection and to feel safe. We know that a lot of our organisations are connected to harmful practices and historical events in the past. People come feeling fearful often and worried about what might be said about them. We need to actually be encouraging people to actually feel like they can actually help seek and get support when they need it without actually feeling like they're going to be notified and all those sorts of things. And unfortunately, that is the result of our systems and the way that they actually do things. So when people come in, they need to be able to come into services where they feel safe, where they feel culturally safe, where they can see things actually that make them feel like they belong there. We often have very, very clinical environments where it actually leaves people feeling very unsafe and unsure what they're going to do. Often what happens when we see children in particular is we might see the parents for a little while and then we'll actually take the child and actually do work with the child. I think sometimes removing the parents from the child can be very, very difficult and a little bit of fear sets in, I think. So what we need to do, if we do need to do that, is to provide some understanding around why we would be wanting to see the child and to help the parents understand what it is we might be asking them and doing with them, just to help them understand what's going to happen for them. The other thing is that our systems need to realise that our children are the centre of our world. They are like our little kings and queens, actually, and that we love and we adore them and they're highly connected. I think that it provides opportunity for other people to be invited in to actually support that child and to honour the kinship systems that we actually have, to understand that our children actually have a variety of different connections that mean different things to what we often think they might mean. And so it's important for the family to be able to explain the context that our children sit in. They don't sit in relationships necessarily where it's just mum and dad. So allowing time to talk and for the worker to listen deeply about what the problem is, to listen deeply about what the family are hoping to actually get from being there, for the family to be able to say what it is they need from the service, for the service providers and practitioners to understand that the family are coming for very, very specific things. I'd love to see our services actually demonstrate our genograms in ways that actually acknowledge our kinship systems. And I would love for our practitioners to understand that the roles of those people probably look very differently than what they actually think it is. Yeah. Obviously, we need very culturally safe spaces with staff who have really thought about decolonising their practice, so decolonising their mind, decolonising their practices, and decolonising their environments, so that families feel safe and comfortable to come and also to return. I would love to see our practitioners consulting regularly with Aboriginal staff, having Aboriginal staff present when they're actually seeing our families and children. And I would love for practitioners to be curious about what might be happening for our children, and particularly when I'm thinking about cultural phenomena that might be happening for children and the consultation that can actually happen with Aboriginal staff. I'd really like our organisations to think about dual service responses. So when I talk about that, I mean that of a mainstream service provision around, you know, maybe seeing a doctor or a psychologist or a social worker, whatever the case might be, but also wondering whether or not the families might like to see traditional healers and those types of things. So thinking about the fact that there's more than one way to actually provide a service to a family. I would really love for our practitioners to be thinking about their thought processes as they're listening to the family, because sometimes I know that we can jump to things like parentification, we can jump to things like, you know, is the family doing this appropriately or whatever, but sometimes we don't understand Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing. And so if we're looking at it from very mainstream way of thinking, then we can bring beliefs and values and frameworks that don't necessarily fit our families, which is why I would really like to see the use of social emotional wellbeing models so that things don't get mislabelled and misdiagnosed. And of course, providing information back to our families and checking in, making sure that we're actually making the right thoughts of what it is they're presenting with. And of course, you know, before we actually notify and think that things are dreadful with our families and children, I think we need to weigh up the protection and safety that actually happens within Aboriginal families against the worries and the harms and the concerns that are actually happening from an organisational perspective. So those are some of the things in terms of mental health that I really think that we could be considering. And of course, there's lots of things I think we can do alongside our allies to make things different as well, Dana.
Beautiful. And I'll come to that, Shirley. One thing I just wanted to pick up is the use of the term notification. So this is a national webinar. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew that when Shirley's talking about notification in South Australia, she means when a report is made to the statutory child protection within South Australia. So however that looks in other states, just to clarify what that meant when Shirley was saying that. Thank you so much, Shirley. You're really beginning to touch on the practical strategies that people can apply to do this work. And Catherine, thank you for your question. She asked, what practical steps do you suggest to help families connect with us? That's a great question, and I want to broaden that out for all of you, because this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where people really care about, is what are the things that they can think about in their practice that can think about decolonisation and how they apply it. So Auntie Pat, I know social and emotional wellbeing model is one of the core stepping stones for that, but I wondered if there was any other practical strategies that you think would be helpful for people to know.
Well, I think that for all of us, you know, whoever we are, I think being aware that we need to be culturally responsive. So I think that landscape has changed, and there's more offerings, I hope, of cultural responsiveness in any university program. But it doesn't need to come from university. It's something that one should do for themselves. You know, find out more about Aboriginal culture. Do your reading, find out about the voice and whatnot, find out about the local history of the area, go and meet the people, so establish some relationships as well. And with the families you might be working with, take your time and build a bit of a relationship there. Aboriginal folk, you know, they know if there's a good person, they will go to that person for help. So, but you need to earn that trust, any human group too. So to build relationships and do the right thing, don't make promises you can't keep, but go to the extra mile to be helpful. So I think I'm probably coming from a big picture basis. Get a cultural mentor, a local cultural mentor who will help you and make sure that that person is paid as well. So your department or your office should be supporting that. Your office or department should have a reconciliation plan. So to be a part of the community is probably a part of it. To also know that turn the gaze inwards and become cultural responsive as well, and know that we all sit in different forms of privilege, but certainly, there is white privilege as well. So acknowledge that and work towards, we don't want people to go and, throw away all their material belongings, but just to be aware that there is a difference and work with that. So I'm probably a bit more general. I've been furiously agreeing with the others, so I'll hand it back to you, Dana, to ask the others. They probably have a bit more practical advice to give.
Oh, Auntie Pat, there was so much that you said that was so practical there. But I will also check in with Tileah as well. Tileah, the practical strategies that you feel would be useful for people in their work in decolonisation.
Yeah, and I think you touched on really important big picture ideas there, Auntie Pat, and including the voice to Parliament. There are just so many initiatives that are already happening every day in community that we don't necessarily hear about. They're not necessarily funded. There are always initiatives, and the answer is always in community. And so, I think that's a really important part of it. But, zooming into kind of our practice, I think that it's really important for people to be able to position themselves as a learner and, to be open to learning wisdom, skill and know-how from First Nations people. I think, like I said before, racism really gets in the way. I'm preaching to the choir here, but, we see the ways that in so many aspects of our life we're kind of just not listened to because racism is stopping people from, being able to position themselves as learners. And so, for me in my work, because of course there's learning every day, always. And so I want to remind myself to ask and not interpret. So even where I share experience with somebody, I might have ideas about their mob, I might even know their family, but I want to ask and not interpret. And I think this is a really helpful way to, position people as the experts in their life. You touched on it, Auntie Pat, about people, checking their privilege. And of course, privilege is intersectional and it comes in all different sorts. But, I think really being aware and turning the gaze inwards, as you say, is such an important part of, being able to offer that welcome. And, the way that the questioner framed it, Dana, was, really about, well, what can I do? And I suppose these practices of welcome, what we know is that they can often start with how people are looked at. And I know this because there was a collective document written from the Cairns community to a service that said, we see the little looks and the little eye rolls. We've become so attuned to body language because, these are the skills that are embedded into the ways that we grow up and the ways that we tell stories. So, your body language is always being assessed. But if you're attending to your privilege in that and, being a learner, that will always be seen. I think that you don't, I'm not suggesting that you overthink it too much, just be open to being a learner. But, for me, the most important thing is keeping an eye out for racism and doing something about it when you see it. We've talked a lot about the ways that, racism is structural, and it's also interpersonal. So I guess for yourself, being able to be aware of the interpersonal racism. But, structurally, if there is not an employment strategy to employ more mob in your service that is servicing First Nations people, then that is structurally racist. And it something needs to be done about that. Mm-hmm. Wherever possible, I tell myself this as much as well, that, we should always be doing ourselves out of a job. I should always have younger people that I'm, encouraging. There should always be people from kind of, just different social locations, whether it's remote communities. We should always be working to elevate the voices of others and to do ourselves out of a job, essentially.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tileah. So many things to think about. And I think a lot of it too is about, I think there's two things that you said that were really important, and Auntie Pat said this too, a sense of looking at yourself. So what is it that you bring? But also you want to do this in a way where you are not overthinking what you're doing. So it's actually quite a balance. It's actually quite difficult to do both of those. So I think what's really important is that, you do have mentoring and others that support you and can guide you in this. And also to know that people make mistakes, and that's part of the process of learning and understanding that, admitting it when that happens, and having support around you when that happens is really important. So I just wanted to kind of add that to all the things that people have said. Sure, I want to frame this question slightly different for you, because you said at the end of what you said before that you talked about how you think so much could be done in the work where allies and Aboriginal people work together. What is it that allies can do with our people to actually work together for this?
Dana, thanks so much for this question, because I think we often get a bit stuck about what we can actually do with this stuff. So I do a lot of thinking about this because I work with a lot of staff, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff, about how they can do this work together. And there doesn't have to be this tension that actually occurs between the cultural and the clinical work. They can coexist and actually help create social-emotional wellbeing assessments. If you actually have a look at a social-emotional wellbeing assessment, that actually fit really, really well with clinical ideas as well. Things can actually fit into that framework. So for me, it's about critically reflecting upon your worldview, about your beliefs and the values that you bring into the work that you do, about what you think is a normal thing and what is not normal. Entering a lifelong journey and unlearning and relearning some of the things that you've learned over the years about Aboriginal people, and actually realising that sometimes the things that we think are actually not correct. Applying the social-emotional wellbeing frameworks, you can actually work on those assessments together. You can create an assessment that actually incorporates both views. You can write that together, actually. You can actually do these things in tandem. You can make sure that culture finds its way into the social-emotional wellbeing assessment. You can actually make sure that it is in writing, the cultural part of it as well, that it is formed by two people, by the Aboriginal worker, practitioner, and the social worker, or the clinical point of view that is occurring. You can do that together. You can honour both those views. You can consult with Aboriginal staff right from the start, rather than in the middle when you're realising that you've got problems happening. You can ensure that strengths and protective factors are clearly identified and how they actually mitigate the risks and the worries that you have. You can allow space for Aboriginal people to speak and to share their stories, and you can listen deeply about what is being said, not just what you're hearing with your ears, but also what you might be hearing in your heart, your mind, and in your body, because sometimes people are saying things, but when you look at them, they're actually saying something very different. You can acknowledge the past impact of trauma that might be happening for your families, and how this also actually applies to Aboriginal people sometimes. We all bring our own traumas into the work that we do. And so we are feeling differently about the work that we do based on sometimes the experiences that we have had ourselves in the organisations even that we work in. So acknowledging the present impact of intergenerational trauma and the part that organisations have played. I think it's actually really important to acknowledge when you make a mistake and to do it quickly, so that the client knows that you're actually somebody who's genuine, who's happy to actually acknowledge you don't have all the answers. I think it's important to be able to listen to the Aboriginal family, for them to be able to bring their ideas into the work that is happening, for Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing to be included in the work that happens, to address racism immediately, and also to address microaggressions. Do it straight away. Acknowledge that it's happened in the room, and you will find that you will get engagement from your families very, very quickly. When you're in your office, I really encourage you to be very, very careful about how you talk about Aboriginal families, because often Aboriginal people are related to those Aboriginal families, and it's very difficult to hear people talk about extended family negatively like that. It's also very inappropriate. If you need to have a conversation, then perhaps you need to think about whether or not you need to go to another place. I've seen great distress occur because non-Aboriginal staff have talked about Aboriginal families inappropriately, and the Aboriginal practitioner has been related. It's really inappropriate. It's really important that in your practice that you are actually noting strength-based practice, that you're talking about the strengths of your families in your case notes, that it's not just something that might sit in your mind or you acknowledge, but it's actually written into your case notes and into the strategies of how you're going to work with your families. It's really, really important. Start to look at how you can decolonise the systems in your office and notice where they interconnect with other systems, because what it will mean is that you'll not just fix that part of the system, but you'll have to go and fix the interconnecting part of that system as well. You can do this by creating working parties where there are Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people working together. I think it's always important to encourage feedback from Aboriginal children and families and communities, and implement the feedback and check in. Have we got this right? Have we done this in the right way? Encourage Aboriginal and family-led decision-making. Have your families think about how we can all keep the child safe, and in particular the family. They have the answers often to how we can keep our children safe. Consider and highlight Aboriginal parenting practices. They may look different to what you think they should be, but they must be considered as part of the way that we raise our children. So I think those sorts of things are needed as well. And generally, talk with your Aboriginal practitioners. They will be able to provide you so much information about what's happening in the room rather than assuming. Get really good supervision. If you find that there are particular things about working with Aboriginal families that you find yourself thinking about, then get really good supervision. It is your responsibility to be actually addressing these issues. And can I say that Aboriginal practitioners will always give so much of their knowledge and their heart into work that they do. And they're not expecting our non-Aboriginal colleagues, our allies, to have all the answers. So we understand that you don't come with Aboriginal knowledge necessarily, and so we are happy to help answer your questions. I hope that's helpful.
Sure, I think that was amazing. And I'm so glad that we're going to have, I hope people are writing down a lot of notes now, because there were so many things that Auntie Pat and Tileah have just said about the things that can be helpful. So many tools, ways to do it at both the systemic level and organisational level, at team level, but also at an individual level. They've covered a range of those types of strategies for you to have a think about. Okay, so I've got a really big question to ask the panelists now. Given everything that you've spoken about tonight, and assuming that we do have a level of systemic change that occurs here, in addition to the personal practices and things and behaviours that we're talking about as well, I'm really interested in what your personal vision is as First Nations people of decolonisation. So, Tileah, I just wanted to start with you first. What is your vision of decolonisation?
Yeah, I guess, just one of the things that I was furiously agreeing with as well, Auntie Pat, as you were talking, Shirley, also, is around employing more mob. So, really carving out space to employ more people. And I'm sure it wasn't that long ago that Auntie Pat studied psychology, where, a culture and identity was put in abnormal psychology. We've come a bit of a way, but curriculum is still a problem. And what people are being taught in universities is still a problem, particularly because it's really hard for First Nations people to stay connected to a lot of that learning, because it just doesn't fit what we know about ourselves. And so, like, on the employment, I know we've kind of talked as though, participants are non-Indigenous tonight. I know that there are also First Nations social emotional wellbeing workers here as well. And, I guess, I think it's really important that, we take up space and, centre our theories and our methodologies, because these are ancient and they're modern, and it is what we can kind of look to really attend to the climate crisis and this crisis in society, this mental health crisis that we hear so much about. So I definitely say to mob to take up more space. But for us to really be pushing racism aside and to be taking a look at the structures of colonialism, and to be able to see the ways that they are operating in our workplaces, in our practice, in the systems, in the, we talked the other week, Shirley, about assessment. There is so much assessment going on, and it's all through this one particular Western frame that we're assessing. So, I guess moving towards healing as well, is certainly part of, what I hope for. But, so that we're all doing the work together, and that we're not just relying on First Nations people who are often, lower paid in organisations, not just looking at them to, decolonise your service, with some art on the wall. It's really the hard work of, attending to racism, attending to the ways that kind of power is structured into everything that we interact with. Centering First Nations voices, from everything from land management to the ways that we do community and respect. I think that, these theories and practices for living have a lot to offer.
Thanks so much, Tileah. And how about you, Shirley? What's your vision of decolonisation?
Oh, Dana, I'll tell you what, my vision would be this, an upside-down model where the gaze is actually on the organisation and critiquing the work that the organisation does, looking at every level of the organisation and looking at how we have colonised and what we actually need to do to uncolonise the work that we do. To introduce Aboriginal knowledges in all that we do, to bring it into the institutions that actually teach Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, to help them think about the practice that they want to be doing when they actually hit the ground running. The education that our social workers and other practitioners are receiving might get a small section of Aboriginal business, but what I'd like to see is it actually be intertwined in everything that we do, in all the things that we do throughout the curriculum, to have systems-wide change, to have reconciliation action plans, and to think about how we're actually going to do the business and reflect the business. interrupting patterns of systems that have been ongoing for a very long time, and actually looking at what it is we've been doing, even from our casework perspective. What is it that we do that continues to colonise? What is it the way we think about? What is it about our models and our frameworks that need to change? And at each point of disruption, we need to think about the change that should occur and go about doing that work as well. We need both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people looking at these things. We need to be healing informed. We need to think about dual service provision, about how we connect with other Aboriginal organisations and other Aboriginal staff. We need to know who those people are in our communities, so that when we ask, would you like an Aboriginal service, we know where to send people. We know how to connect them up. Please, I would love to see our services not stay in continual assessment mode. We would like families to be given some intervention and support and what it is they're actually asking for. We continue to assess, but we actually need to be providing services that help and support our families. We need to be utilising Aboriginal frameworks, and we need to make sure that there's self-determination and that Aboriginal organisations are provided with the opportunity to do the work. But we also need to provide choice. We need to provide Aboriginal families choice about whether or not they want an Aboriginal organisation or a non-Aboriginal organisation. And of course, thinking about some of those other things about what allies can do to actually be implemented. And basically what we want is for the work to be happening ongoingly and not just when Aboriginal business is the centre of attention. We want there to be an ongoing practice where we actually look at what we're actually doing and realise we're colonising in the moment, and then working out ways of actually uncolonising that. And it takes all of us to be doing that. We need to be hearing from our families. We need to be hearing how they're experiencing our services. If you don't have many Aboriginal people coming to your service, you have to start to wonder why, and maybe starting to look at some of these things as what needs to happen. If you are seeing Aboriginal people all the time, you're obviously doing something that's actually really, really helpful. And if you've got one of those allies in your office that get phone calls from Aboriginal people all the time, I'd be going to them and saying, what is it you are doing? Because for Aboriginal people to connect with services is really, really hard. And there's obviously something that you are doing that is helpful. And can I say to our leaders, you need to be leading this from the top. Your staff need to be hearing this conversation. It's not something that we pull out just at an event. It's stuff that we need to be thinking about ongoingly. It needs to be something that we're looking at staff meeting. We need to be thinking about how we're reporting on it. We need to be thinking about strategic planning and how we're going to get Aboriginal business looking differently. We need to be thinking about the people that we employ and why we're employing them. We need to think about the services that we are providing and the way we are thinking about our service provision and the way we are writing it. And we generally need to be honouring Aboriginal people and providing spaces that are culturally safe, where they're receiving services that are culturally safe and culturally appropriate. So I guess that's my vision for decolonising. And of course, I could talk about that a lot more, Dana. I've done a lot of thinking about that.
It's wonderful, Shirley. It gives a lot of people a really strong picture of what that looks like. And now we've got a few minutes left, and I'd really like to hear, you've been in this field for years and years and years. You're an elder in our community. You've done so much work. What's your vision, Aunt? What do you want to see with decolonisation?
Now, I think it's a possibility as well. I think it is a struggle, but it is a possibility. What I'd like to see is any Aboriginal family, youth, any non-Aboriginal family youth be able to go to the local AMS or the local health services and have a smorgasbord of opportunities. So, they might choose to go and see a cultural healer, and they'll be available there. they might choose to and book in for a back to country camp where they go out bush and they're taken with people who look after them and teach them about the country and being one with the country. And that goes for all Australians, not just Aboriginal people, but all Australians should have that opportunity. I'd like to see them go where they do wildflower essence healing. There's so much, and I think that we haven't probably stated this enough. I'm seeing lots of programs and reclamation of cultural ways that are happening, which are really fantastic. And Aboriginal people are starting to reclaim all those different practices. And I think that can be there. Aboriginal people are very generous. So I think that will be offered to everyone. So I think that any person should go and get any service. If they need clinical support, if they need, medication, that they should get it. But the medication should be given in the view of this is a short-term solution. We need to build up your social networks. We need to connect you back stronger with your family and make sure you're doing some good cultural activities that make you feel good, that make you feel like you belong. So I think that's what I see. I think one of the things that we don't talk about, and I feel like we're screeching Marxist or something if we do, but, we have to sort of be a bit more critical about capitalism as well, and materialism. So we need to check ourselves and our groups that we don't get gobbled up by that, and that, it is family and community and a sense of belonging that's very important. I'd like to see those cultural ways come back. We don't throw out the good Western ways that also work for everyone, but I think that would add to the wellness, well-being of all humans and the country, back to planetary health again, planetary well-being. So I think it's possible. I'm seeing things that I never would have I wouldn't have imagined when I was a young psychologist. At Curtin University, for instance, I don't know if they still have this man there, but the School of Psychological Science actually had employed a cultural advisor, and he worked with everyone and the students and the staff. So that was really fantastic that he was there present, very legitimate, very valued. Not, that's a teacher's aide or whatever, but very much a part of being a member of the staff in his own right, and valued for the unique cultural knowledge he brought. And I was absolutely, I thought that was pretty fantastic, and I would not have imagined that when I'd started out. So I think there's great possibilities, and we keep on talking and sharing these great sparks of hope or initiatives, and then we can get something happening. I think that could become a snowball effect. So I think I'd like to see a society where people are empowered, they're given the resources they need to live a thriving life, and our cultural differences are celebrated.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Auntie Pat. There is such a wide array of all the things you spoke about, all of the panellists spoke about, across multiple levels, across this complex systems, all of the stuff that you spoke about tonight. We've only got a very short amount of time now, a couple of minutes really, before I close and take the participants through a few final points, really to give one key message. If there is one key message that each of you want people to take away, given everything that you've said tonight, what is that one key message? So, Tileah, I just wanted to go to you. Is there one key message that you want people to take away tonight?
Not to have six. I think, really attend to racism, to push that out of the way, to work to decolonise. And I think to do that, be led by First Nations people. So employ them, pay them, and follow them.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tileah. Shirl, just one key message that you'd like to summarise tonight to give to people.
Start to think about how you can decolonise your mind, your practices, and your environment.
Thank you, Shirley. And Auntie Pat, your final word on this, is there just one more key message, key summary that you wanted to give people tonight?
Okay, not trying to be, because the others stole all the good final comments. So I'll try and think of something different. I think as we're having this fantastic conversation, and I must applaud fellow panellists and yourself, Dana, for, shepherding us through this big conversation that we're having. And I hope the listeners and viewers have enjoyed it. Our audience has enjoyed it as much as we have, and I hope we've given some practical solutions and some places to start. But I think my big message is that we're all human beings. We are different, but we are all human beings. So, treat each other with love and honour.
Thank you so much, Art. Well, on that, I really wanted to thank the panellists tonight. Thank you for all your beautiful, thoughtful and challenging words that you've given all of us tonight. And also thank you for all those that are participating on the webinar. So there's a few things that I wanted to say before we close off. First of all, we have an exit survey that you can provide feedback. Click the banner above or scan the QR code to guide to the Survey Monkey. That will give us some feedback about the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, so make sure that you follow up on that. The next webinars are supporting the mental health of bereaved parents after miscarriage, stillbirth and neonatal death, the Black Rainbow, assessment strategies, and also about the latest innovations to embed and sustain trauma-informed care. Emerging Minds next webinars will be held in June around responsive parenting, supporting infant and toddler mental health, and keep an eye out for all the notifications around webinars that are coming up. There are also podcasts that come out on a fortnightly basis. MHPN supports 350 networks across the country where mental health practitioners meet either in person or online, so you can be a part of any of those. This webinar was co-produced by MHPN and Emerging Minds for the Emerging Minds National Workforce Centre for Child and Mental Health. This is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Support for Child and Youth Mental Health Program. Before I close, I'd like to acknowledge the experience of those that have experienced the hurts and harms of the systems in Australia, and particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their family and carers. We wish self-determination, justice, hope, and thriving for all. Thank you, everyone, for your participation this evening. Good night.